In 2005, the Chinese University of Hong Kong worked with the Shan Foundation for Buddhist Culture and Education to establish the Center for the Study of Humanistic Buddhism under the Department of Cultural and Religious Studies. Since August 2014, the center has moved to the Faculty of Arts in the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Professor Chen Jianhuang is the director of the center. He completed his bachelor's degree from the National Taiwan University, majoring in Chinese literature. He also completed a master's in philosophy and PhD from the Department of Chinese at the University of Hong Kong. Professor Chen is a specialist in research study of the Amitabha Pure Land, as well as in the academic thoughts of the Songyun period. He has taught at the National Pingdong University in the Department of Chinese Language and Literature. He has also served as the Dean of the Office of Research and Development, the Secretary General, and the Head of Department of Chinese. I would now like to invite Professor Chen Jianhuang to introduce you to the guest speaker for this evening. Professor Chen.
Our honorable guest speaker this evening is Venerable Professor Miao Guang. She is the personal English interpreter of Venerable Master Hsing Yun. She is also a researcher at the Institute of Humanistic Buddhism of Guang, and she's an adjunct professor at the Department of Religious Study, Nanhua University. And she's also teaches at the College of Buddhist Study, Guang College at the Philippines. Is that right? Okay. And I'm most happy to have Venerable Professor Miao Guang here tonight to talk about how the Buddha, as an ordinary human being, tackled with the issue with extraordinary wisdom, and to discover with us a different side of the Buddha. And now I would like to invite Venerable Professor Miao Guang to deliver a speech. So can we close?
Thank you very much, Professor Chen. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
大家好。
大家好。
I am very honored to have this opportunity to be here at the Chinese University of Hong Kong to deliver a speech. Actually, personally, I have taken the position at the podium at the same university on 2 or 3 separate occasions, except that it has been for a different role, that is to be the English interpreter for Venerable Master Hsing Yun. And so I would say this evening it will be the first time where I actually feel most of the pressure and weight, since I no longer have the liberty of just listen to someone say something and re-deliver it in a different language. But tonight I will do my best to be here and to share with all of you maybe some of my learnings and experiences in having followed Venerable Master Hsing Yun in the past few years. As you may understand that he's reaching an age of 90. And in the past years he has been focusing on his travels only to China. So I started to feel that maybe I will be out of a job soon. Since going to China means that I don't need to translate from Chinese to Chinese. That would be even worse. But I think Venerable Master somehow reads my mind, and he told me one day, he said, why don't you start to go and deliver English Dharma talks on your own? And so I turned to him and said, look, Venerable Master, I have been only interpreting for you for the past 15 years. Okay? I really don't know much Dharma. And so he looked at me for about 5 seconds and he says, yes you do. You can take all my books and deliver them into English. So he has given me a very good leverage and a very good transition point from being an interpreter to maybe a potential Dharma speaker with a very solid foundation of what we call the teachings, or maybe some of the Dharma interpreted in this form. And so that is why tonight, this evening, maybe as my first ever Dharma talk, I am still leaning on the shoulder of the giant, Venerable Master Hsing Yun, in presenting one of his earliest writings that has been translated into English. That is a biography of Sakyamuni Buddha. And the purpose of delivering this topic today is perhaps it is an opportunity for us to look at the founder of Buddhism from a latest perspective. And by latest perspective, it means that we no longer look at him as some kind of mystical feature. For one thing, he was historical. And second, he lived as a human being. Therefore, as the finger that pointed to the moon, being the fact that yes, we are the ones who have to tread the path, he nevertheless gave us that guidance by demonstrating the way that maybe a spiritual cultivator can seek in a quest for enlightenment. And so tonight I present to you the topic Extraordinarily Human by reintroducing the Buddha through this biography of Sakyamuni Buddha written by Venerable Master Hsing Yun. And so when we came, I decided to present this biography to the first ever audience that I come across as a speaker in Hong Kong for a couple of reasons. I'm sure you have been to several Dharma lectures so far, maybe spoken in different languages, Chinese, Cantonese, Taiwanese, and maybe English. So may I ask you a question? So of all the Dharma talks you have been to, which has been the most memorable or the most excellent talk to you? Can you remember? Don't worry, I'm not going to make you cite from any of the talks that you claim to be the best or the most venerable. But just a little challenge in asking you to think, yes, what actually defines a good talk? Was it something that, yes, I couldn't understand anything that the speaker was saying, so it must have been very excellent? Or actually, what the speaker was saying makes sense to us? Or something you can walk away remembering thinking, yes, it's inspiring, it's inspirational. Whatever it is, I hope that tonight, maybe having delivered a book which you have or have not read, we all walk away with the experience of probably one of the greatest sages in the religion called Buddhism. Why? I would say, for me, any talk that claims to be excellent or wonderful is usually a talk where the speaker shares his or her personal experiences as a spiritual practitioner. Because the story is delivered in the most vivid and the most related manner. And so tonight, as we talk about Sakyamuni Buddha, the person who actually started the whole idea of Buddhism. But to say when he first attained enlightenment, Buddha didn't exactly say, oh, I'm here to teach you Buddhism, right? There was no such an idea as Buddhism. He merely said, look, this is something which I became awakened to. This is a truth that I have realized, and that's something which I'd like to share with you. So having said that, we need to wonder where that idea of ism comes from. Right? Obviously, ism, anything that ends with the suffix ism has to be an English word. So basically we say, yes, the word Buddhism didn't come about until the 19th century. But when did he become enlightened? 2nd or 3rd BC? That's like almost 20 centuries apart. So what kind of philosophy would take 20 years to take form in the name of Buddhism? And we can attribute this to a Portuguese archaeologist named Shan, who came along with an English expedition to China and discovered all these manuscripts in Guang and realized, okay, let's give it a name. It's about Buddha, so it becomes Buddhism. So from then on, we start to hear about the various different legends about this person who brought about probably one of the most profound and most interesting philosophy, way of life, or religion that has awed people in the following 20 centuries. But most of the time, like I've said before, he has been presented as a mystical form. And so tonight we present a biography for a couple of reasons. So first of all, we understand that the biography is usually drawn from ancient text resources. It has come some kind of source. And second, by reading a story, especially in this case, we are actually presented with what we call an intimate or an imaginative retelling of the life of the founder of Buddhism. Okay. Thirdly, we have a chance to see, okay, how he actually spent his life in youth, renunciation, enlightenment, as well as the propagation of the Dharma. And so through the learning of his hardships and the presentation of his boundless wisdoms, may we all come closer to a man, a historical man whom we regard as probably of the wisest throughout history. Well, at least from my perspective. I'm a monastic, so I can simply and easily justify that, yes, this is a faith I'm following. Okay, following the footsteps of the Buddha. And so I understand that you probably don't have a copy of this book because not to make it seem like I'm trying to promote this book in the talk tonight, I have decided to present the book to you in a different form. That is, I will be drawing from some excerpts from the book to show them on the PowerPoint. And so you will be able to read along in tonight's what we call maybe a gathering of the Dharma. Okay? To get a glimpse of the story that is retold from the perspective of a human who was extraordinary. But before I continue, may I just see a show of hand who has already read this book? In Chinese, okay. Okay. Even in Chinese, just Venerable Yu. Okay, maybe the gentleman in back. Okay, but that's all right. And so this gives us a first perspective and maybe a preview to what the book is actually like. And so, as we talk about a biography, we understand that, yes, drawn from a literal ancient text, we probably have the largest amount of information on Buddhist thinking. And from this record of the figure's life, we hear the stories to try to understand the way of his thinking and philosophy. And this is probably why we're presenting the biography, because it has a supreme position given in a certain point of time. So it's presented as an authoritative understanding of Buddhism, just like how we read the Bible to understand a bit about God and Jesus. And most importantly, well, the reason why Venerable Master Hsing Yun, the founder of Buddhism, wrote this is to spread the thinking of the Buddha. But the most interesting about this biography, that he was so humane, presents what we call the Buddhist Zeigai. The word Zeigai is a German term which means a thought of the era, a spirit of a particular era. Therefore, in the 21st century, we start to come across terms such as Humanistic Buddhism. This is probably what we mean by the Buddhist Zeigai, where we start to really understand, perceive, practice, and present Buddhism with that kind of thinking. That is humanistic, as you can see on the banner. Humanistic means something that was taught by the Buddha, something which is needed by human beings, something which purifies, something which is beautiful and virtuous. And so as we go into the biography, okay, and so try to bear with me, maybe doing a bit of reading actually will enhance our impression of the book. So this is actually the opening of the book by Venerable Master, to explain why we have to read a biography. Okay. And so the book goes, if we wish to understand a religion, to know whether or not a religion provides what we need, then we should first come to understand the founder of that religion. We should question whether that person's character or wisdom is worthy of reverence and faith, and think about what guidance he can offer to us. Can he liberate us from life's pain and suffering? And so on. So Buddhism presents itself as a religion that asks you to doubt and question. Since it's empirical, it's all about doubting, asking, testing it before you decide whether it suits you or not. And having done that, we decide on a faith. And so now why do we actually need to have a faith? Each one of us take faith in a very different form. For maybe an academic scholar, your faith is entirely your field of study. But for me, as a Buddhist nun or a monastic, my faith may lie entirely in this religious practice called Buddhism. But whatever it is, on page 1, the opening continues to tell us that faith should provide us with more than just repose for our spirit and peace. Faith should tackle the big problems, such as birth, death, and freeing us from suffering, so that we can attain lasting happiness. So that is why, when we are choosing a religious path, we should understand its founder, how that person perfected himself. Is his nature pure? Is he free? So these are all the vital questions that we can ask. So now we present some kind of prototype and say, look, this is the model that actually worked. It worked so well, his influence continued for 2,600 years. So now, would you like to try that model and see? So let's do a bit of a revision of the Buddha's life. Not sure whether all of you are actually familiar with that, but maybe quickly going over through it. We can present the life of the Buddha in 8 simple stages. First of all, it's his descendants from Tushita heaven. 兜率天. If you go to Guang Shan, you will see 兜率天 just outside the mountain. It's a convenience store that sells soda, bread, food, instant noodles. Okay? It's a land where it fulfills your needs. Only in the actual case of Tushita heaven, it fulfills your spiritual needs. So this is the place, 兜率天 of Tushita heaven, where it has been said that the incubate Buddhas for the human world will be before they descend to the world. So the first stage of Sakyamuni Buddha is said to be here, where Longhua Shanhui, the dragon flower assemblies actually took place 3 times. So that's when he waited. And so legends has it that he waited over there after eons of cultivation before he descended to the human world as Prince Siddhartha. And so while he was waiting, Queen Maya, his mother, had this very exceptional dream. After years and years of trying, suddenly she had this dream of a 6-tusked white elephant entering her body from the side. So after she woke up, she became pregnant with the prince. And in this simple picture, we're only looking at the white elephant. But to be more precise, the dream was of a 6 tusks, because you can see a white elephant. Elephants are white because they symbolize the signs of auspiciousness. And the 6 tusks represent what we call the 6 paramitas, as he is known to be the Bodhisattva who ascended to the human world. Therefore, Bodhisattvas carry with them the practices of the 6 perfections, of the 6 paramitas: generosity, discipline, patience, endurance, and concentration and prajna wisdom. And so there has been said that in one of his previous lives, he was a 6-tusked white elephant king who had many wives, many female white elephants as his wives. And amongst them, it was one of his concubines that became the white elephant's favorite one. But unfortunately, it has been said that females are jealous of each other. So one day, this elephant king offered a flower to his queen. This caused the concubine to be very, very angry. And so she teamed up with a hunter and said, look, you have been trying to hunt down the elephant king, so I'm going to tell you where the king is. He's going to be tomorrow. He's going to show up next to the pond to have a drink of water at a certain time tomorrow afternoon, so be there. That was the concubine's revenge. And so on the next day, yes, the elephant king showed up, and the hunters was satisfied with the opportunity to hunt down the elephant, and he pulled out each of his tusks. And so in the process of feeling that pain, this elephant realized that, okay, all this is happening to me out of the jealousy that I've caused for my concubine. But it's okay. May I take on all your pain. May I take on all your anger and suffering. This is the kind of life I shall lead. And so carrying with that symbolism, we will see, yes, the spirit of the Bodhisattva thus descends to the human world in the form of Prince Siddhartha. And so after he was born, this miraculous baby took 7 steps with a lotus flower blossoming underneath each of his steps. So far, so good. The story is something which we may all be familiar with. But having grown up and eventually being taken out of his palace, the foresight of an elderly man, a sick man, dead man, and a renunciant awakened his mind to search for the truth. So on a quiet night, he left his palace on a white horse with his attendant Shan in search of the so-called liberation. And after he attained enlightenment, there was a moment where he had to come face to face with Mara, who was so afraid of his enlightenment, he tried everything he could do to prevent this savior of the world from formally attaining enlightenment. We shall cover the details of the story later as we present the so-called Buddha Zaigai, and by telling part of the story, I won't spend too much on this for now. And so eventually Mara failed, he attained enlightenment. Coming to two of the world's most famous quotes or claims upon that moment. First of all is the truth of the fact that yes, we all come into existence and go out of existence because of causes and conditions. 诸法因缘生，诸法因缘灭. Okay, coming down to these words, all things arise due to causes and conditions. All things are obliterated also due to causes and conditions. His first realization. But having also said that, the second claim he said was that all of us actually possess the Buddha nature. It's just that our pearl has been covered up by the dust of our ignorance. Therefore, we need to know. That's all a matter of time and practice. So from then on, these two have continued to inspire the human race in the different pursuits of enlightenment. And so in that case, we will probably say, yes, what had he become enlightened to? Okay, this is quite a nice poem which tried to depict his thoughts upon that moment, where it says, through many a birth, I wandered in this world, seeking in vain the builder of this house. Unfulfilling it is to be born again and again. O housemaker, now I have seen you. You shall build no more houses for me. Your beams are broken, your ridge pole is shattered. My mind is free from all past conditionings and craves the future no longer. So in this case, what is the house? The house of our perceived self, which is in fact insubstantial. And the house that determines our emotions, whether it is anger, happiness, or confusion. But in the end, the Buddha realizes that they are merely nothing. And so, in Mara's challenge, he sent forth his army to frighten him away from that final moment of enlightenment. And he even sent forth his three most beautiful daughters, trying to seduce him, so that he would give up his idea. Okay? And having failed in all of that, Mara's final challenge is saying, look, you know the truth, but you may be the only one. Because every human being in this world are ignorant, extremely ignorant and stubborn. So what if they don't listen to you? And in response, the Buddha says, there will be some whose eyes are only slightly dimmed by dust. And then we understand. So the realization of the fact that all of us possess the Buddha nature gives him faith and confidence that eventually one day we will all walk out of that house and become him, or become another him. So for that, having defeated Mara, he continued his teachings for now 49 years across 300 or so assemblies, sharing the Dharma. And finally he entered Nirvana under the Sala trees. So probably nothing new so far. His final words right before Nirvana was, all compounded things decay. Work out your own salvation with diligence. And thus, what remained was his Dharma in form of what we know as the Buddha, his wisdom. So rely on yourself, rely on the Dharma, and rely on nothing else. Most important message that we have been given. To be reminded of the fact that there's this human being merely walked the path and showed us the path. And now it's time for us to learn how to walk the path. Simple and precise in a nutshell. But we can also see, for those who have read about stories of his life in one way or the other, you will be able to see on this chart that every stage of his life was in fact a demonstration of the teachings he had taught. Okay, so for example, in the very beginning, even having to be born as an enlightened being, he was showing us the cause of life and death through the 12 links of dependent origination. And as a prince, when he was given 4 palaces for each season, and the most beautiful women and the greatest entertainment, it was a demonstration of how human beings on one stage or another will indulge in 5 desires. But finally, to see the sights outside his palace, he came across probably one of the most shocking truths to him. The fact that we all go through suffering, either in the form of the 4 sufferings, birth, old age, sickness and death, or added with separation from loved ones, the hate of being stuck with people who you don't like. When you try to avoid someone, trust me, you open that switch, the harder you avoid, the more often you bump into that person. And nodding away, right? And also, what we call the flame of the 5 skandhas, when you overly cling onto that notion of the self. Okay, so together, these 8 types of suffering will cause us to be unhappy again and again. And so that inspired him on the great going forward, where he relinquished his life's burdens and attachments by going into asceticism. So the story had it that the 6 years actually gave him nothing but failure, but which is not true. It actually became a stimulus of him to jump onto the path, what we call the middle path, eventually leading him to enlightenment. And so upon enlightenment, his realization of dependent origination and cause and condition as well as effect became the very foundations to his future teachings across his 49 years of propagation. And finally, having entered Nirvana, he says, look, ultimately at the end of the path, this is the type of liberation we were talking about. And if we have more opportunity, we probably can talk a little bit more about this. But let's go back to now, having said that, how Venerable Master depicts a fountain. So let's go back to the book, and to go back to chapter 1 to see how this main character is being brought up in the entire biography. And so let's read along. So in this part, Venerable Master writes, the founder of Buddhism, Sakyamuni Buddha, was born on the 8th day of the 4th month of the year, 464 BCE, into a country which has come to be considered one of the world's 4 great cultural wellsprings, India. His birth is well documented in both Chinese and historical sources and others. So we should not view the Buddha as some spirit that appeared out of thin air or as some intangible God. The Buddha was born in a specific time and place and had parents who bore and raised him. He was a real human being who persevered through many years of hardship and austerity in order to become a perfectly enlightened person of great wisdom. Students and scholars across the world have recognized this fact. Sakyamuni Buddha was born into this world, raised in this world, and became a Buddha in this world. He's the lamp of wisdom that shines for us through the long night and raft, which keeps us afloat in the turbulent seas of suffering. The Buddha's character has been perfected, and his nature been purified. He has liberated himself from the bondage of suffering and transcended the pain of life and death. He taught us how to follow in his footsteps for more than 40 years, guiding us along that great spiritual path. All the teachings he left us flow from the sea of great wisdom and deal intimately with concepts of ending suffering and attaining happiness. People embrace the Buddha's teachings in different ways. Some see Buddhism as a religion of faith, while others treat Buddhism as a philosophy or a subject of study. Some also take the founder of Buddhism, Sakyamuni Buddha, as a role model and aspire to become like him. Sakyamuni Buddha is the greatest sage in our world that has been known, and his teachings are the most profound. The teachings of the Buddha have survived until the present day and have spread across the globe, but they are still hampered by those who mystify the teachings and ignore the spirit of the Buddha coming into this world. When their philosophy transcends the practical, they fail to experience the Buddha's intention. Only when we transmit the spirit of the Buddha to bring enlightenment and liberation to all beings will Buddhism inspire great faith and accomplish its mission. So a very clear stance in the very beginning of the biography to present what we call his Buddhist Zaigai, spirit of the era. And what kind of Zaigai? Let's go back to parts of this piece of writing and see the important part, the points that Venerable Master as the writer wishes to emphasize. So first of all, in the part where he said Buddha is a real human being and should not be viewed as some spirit that appeared out of thin air or as some intangible God. He's merely telling us that yes, Sakyamuni Buddha, this great sage, was but a human being. Most important, 他是人. He wasn't a god. Okay? He wasn't some kind of spirit or some kind of creator. Simply, he was a human being. And secondly, when he comes across in his writing where it says, he was a real human being who persevered through many years of hardship and austerity in order to become a perfectly enlightened person of great wisdom. What he wants to say was, yes, he was a human being, but a human being who knew how to perfect his character, as we all try to do at one stage or the other in our life. And thirdly, when he says, all the teachings he left us flow from the sea of great wisdom and deal intimately with the concepts of ending suffering and attaining happiness. It was merely trying to tell us that yes, this human being who tried to perfect his character did it for one reason, to show us how to live in this human world. There's a Chinese saying, 做人难，人难做，难做人. Hard it is to be a human. Human beings are hard to be, and to be a human being is hard. Okay? Either way or the other. So that sounds quite pessimistic. Okay, if we end the talk here and say yes, we walk away thinking, okay, being a human being is all about suffering. We're pretty much doomed, right? But he wants to say, no. That's not what the Buddha wanted to show. He says yes, eventually suffering comes across to make us stronger. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Don't try to justify that one. But what doesn't kill you makes you stronger means that yes, suffering could be part of the reasons that don't kill you, but makes you stronger. And so finally, he wants us to take the founder of Buddhism, Sakyamuni Buddha, as a role model and aspire to become like him. In other words, that becomes a goal for Buddhists who live their human life. A human being to perfect his character as a human being, how to live as a human being, and how to achieve that goal as a human being. Pretty much becomes the main pillar in biography of Sakyamuni Buddha. So he was a man who actually showed us how he was a father, how he was a son, how he was a husband, how he was a ruler, and how he was a teacher. So this book, consisting of 400 pages, is made up of about 80 chapters of different stories, each is showing different stages of his life. That gives us some kind of clue in terms of how we can deal with the imperfections in our life. But since I don't have much time to go through this, maybe I'll just pick out certain parts to see, yes, how he actually dealt with his life. First of all, I would like to present two perspectives in the biography tonight. The first one is, when was the Buddha human? We are talking about a human who, when he became extraordinary, wasn't really much of a human anymore. He became extraordinary. But there are actually 4 occasions in the biography that showed us that he was nothing but human. The first one was Queen Maya's conception. And we read different versions of the biography. And usually there was, I remember when I was 11 years old, when I first moved to Australia, my mother took me to a temple and sat me down with a monastic. And so this Buddhist nun said to me, let me tell you a story about Sakyamuni Buddha. He was born from the armpit of his mother. So I sat there, and some of the children in my class started going, okay, how does this work? Okay, so that still hasn't really, allowed me to find any answer regarding that myth. But having read this biography, I somehow felt better, about the fact that no, biologically, no human beings comes out of the armpit. And so in this biography, you can see Sakyamuni Buddha depicted as just a human being. Okay? He was born the regular way, but with some kind of mystical signs. And so by those mystical signs, we can see them in a lot of biographies. And one of the examples I'll be using is a Chinese version called 是人不是神 that was written in about 1486, okay, during the Ming Dynasty by a Buddhist monk in classical Chinese language. Okay. That was probably the closest biography that Chinese Buddhists can probably come across that wrote about Sakyamuni Buddha. Okay. And then the next one that came about is probably the one we are seeing, Sakyamuni Buddha, the biography. Okay. And why am I bringing forward 是人不是神? Because this is a Chinese classical that came along with the Buddha stories in classical Chinese, along with illustrations. But it was really, really Chinese. It was written as if I'm reading about a Buddha that grew up and attained enlightenment in a Chinese background. But in such a mystical way. I'm hoping that maybe by presenting some of the stories, you could feel that yes, like in our version here, the Buddha is in fact quite human. Okay, let's take his descendants from Tushita Heaven, for example. This is from 是人不是神. You can see now, this is Tushita Heaven. Colorful clouds and deities dressed in the Chinese costumes. This is the place where the Buddha received his forecast or depiction, 受记, that you shall soon become the next Buddha in the human world. Okay? And so, 是人不是神 depicts this moment prior to descendants as some kind of emperor or royal figure living inside a Chinese structured shrine, okay? Surrounded by deities dressed in Chinese costumes, waiting to descend. And let's go back to the biography. If we go back to the biography, okay, from that mysterious depiction, okay, none of those stories actually exist in the biography, but this is how it's presented in the book. Okay, let's do a bit more reading. Sorry about the top, I hope you can see it. Here's how the Buddha was born, according to the author of the biography. Summer went and winter came. Fall ended and spring began. The days passed like a flowing river, and the young couple, Queen Maya and King Suddhodana, were brought along by its current. By the days of happiness for the royal couple were drawing to a close, quickly approaching the shadows of darkness and dejection. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and months became years. But the royal couple failed to conceive a son that could become heir to the throne. After performing his duties as king, Suddhodana would return to the palace, see his warm and loving wife, look upon the lonely rooms and furnishings, and moan and sigh in unhappiness. Sounds quite like an ordinary pair of human beings, right? An ordinary couple is waiting to be conceived of a child. Okay? No supernatural dreams, no signs. Okay? And Queen Maya, who was a clever woman, knew what was troubling the king. One day, she spoke to him. "My lord, we are slowly growing older, and yet we have no children to call our own. You are the king of this land. How can a king be without an heir?" The king sighed and furrowed his eyebrows. The queen continued. "My lord," she said, sitting close to him, "you shouldn't be so stubborn. Listen to me. All of the kings of the past had concubines in their royal families. Why should you not do the same? In this palace, there's only me. You should invite more women to the palace so that they may bear you a son." Okay, once again, a very ordinary and regular conversation between a barren couple. "No," the king refused. "If it is my fate to have no heir, then even if all the women in the world came to the palace, it will make no difference." Okay, very sturdy husband, royal. Thus King Suddhodana spoke, but in his heart his anxiety grew by the day. As for Maya, she was the queen of Kapilavatthu, beautiful like the full moon in autumn, with a pure heart as lotus. But she could not produce an heir for the kingdom of Kapilavatthu, a son who would succeed King Suddhodana to the throne. One calm, clear night, in Queen Maya's 40th year, she was sleeping soundly on her bed. She dreamt of a wonderful, impressive being riding a white elephant through space towards her. When he reached her, entered into her body through an opening on her right side, and settled in her womb, the queen was startled and woke from her slumber, discovering that it had all been a dream. After she awoke, Queen Maya told King Suddhodana of the dream. Hearing his queen's words, the king and queen should not understand what the dream meant. After her dream, her life returned to normal. She lived in peace and happiness, passing her days without any worry, pain, hatred, greed, or falsehood. She came to dislike crowded and noisy places, and instead took delight in serene areas by groves of water. Not long afterwards, the queen happily informed King Suddhodana of her pregnancy. So you can see, having read that, for one thing, this author has deciphered my trouble about how a baby could ever become born through the armpit. Only depicting it as a part of the dream, but the rest of it is quite normal. And so to really talk about how the queen became pregnant, not through supernatural signs. We actually discussed this with one of the professors from China, and she says, okay, let's look at it from a psychological perspective. Okay? Imagine, okay, you have a very loving husband, but you're barren. Okay? So your husband forces a smile on you and says, it's okay. It's okay if we don't have a child. All I need is you. It's okay. I don't need other women. If I don't have a son, I don't have a son. So if you were the wife, I believe the stress would really, really fall onto you. So therefore, the professor says, looking at it this way, it becomes a kind of psychological pressure that was being placed onto the woman. So therefore, she had that dream. And so presenting it as a psychological effect, but without losing that really auspicious element of the birth of someone really great. This is simply how the process of pregnancy is put forth and being done through in very simple and ordinary way. Okay, so that's why we say, okay, that's how Venerable Master wants to present the Buddha as a mere human being. Okay, so that's through the conception. Okay. Another depiction from 是人 Miao, okay, the Chinese queen dreaming of a mystical Chinese figure entering a Chinese palace, although the entire story, the historical Buddha became conceived in India. Okay? But we can sort of see how stories change from time to time, from place to place, from culture to culture, okay? Only to bring the readers closer to that actual story in it. Okay? So as we read this biography, perhaps you can try to feel the kind of ambience of a human being that this author tries to present. And the next is what we call the foresights. Okay? And so going back to 是人 Miao, okay, nothing extraordinary from here. Okay? The prince goes out of the palace, sees an old man or a sick man. Okay? Nothing really different as depicted in the biography. He sees a dead man and then the renunciant. But the interesting is, what kind of messages had the renunciant ever sent to the prince? To put it simply, it becomes the renunciant and says, I'm the one who sees beyond the truth. Therefore, I am the renunciant. And that, therefore, inspires the prince. Okay? But let's now go back to a more detailed conversation presented by the author, where the renunciant says, I am one who has left the ties of family behind. I wish to escape the suffering of aging, illness, and death. My purpose is to find the great path of freedom and liberation. No one can avoid aging, illness, and death. None can escape impermanence in its many forms. Therefore, I have left home to become a renunciate. I have no joys or sorrows. My only wish is to attain a state beyond birth and death, to reach the exalted state of equality in all beings. Okay, so in this presentation, we can pretty much see that actually that was the kind of goal which Sakyamuni Buddha or Prince Siddhartha had wanted to pursue. Okay, but being presented by the renunciate, very prestigious status to these statements have been given by the author to say, yes, that is a wish for all spiritual cultivators, not for any particular being, but for all. And so as he goes on, he says, I desire neither wealth or women. I live in my days in the tranquillities of the forest. I have completely cut myself off the corners from the concerns of worldly fame or benefit, and have no thoughts of I or mine. I do not differentiate between pure and impure, between beautiful and ugly. I beg for food in cities and villages to sustain this temporary body of mine. First message, a discovery of what a spiritual practitioner would want to pursue. Second, the type of lifestyle a spiritual practitioner will want to live. Quite regular, quite consistent with all the other versions, until we come to this part. When I come upon people who are suffering, I do everything I can to alleviate their pain. Okay, what difference do you spot already? A goal that is not set for just the self. The spirit of the Bodhisattva that has been presented as part of modern day Buddhist thinking. You are me, I am you. We are one. If you're not happy, I'm not happy. Added in there. I have never hoped for repayment, nor sought to garner merit. My only aim is to take the world's suffering upon myself. Reflecting the spirit of that six-tasked elephant when he was being tortured. For if I do not work to liberate the beings from the great sea of birth and death, who will? So over here we're bringing out a part of the Zygai where it shows not just the concern for oneself, but for the rest of the world, which is not usually found in other versions of the biography. Okay, reflecting that the basic being, the idea of being a human being is not just about making comfort for yourself, but remembering the fact that yes, when all things arise, depending on causes and conditions, that you and I are interdependent. Therefore, the liberation should be holistic when we show concern to one another. And so after speaking, Siddhartha lifted his head to look upon the renunciant, but he had vanished. This is only one of the very few mystical signs or things that has been presented in the book to lift that status of a spiritual practitioner onto a much higher one to see, yes, this is probably the goal of how we want to be as a human being. So having that conversation, this is the realization of the prince. This world is merely a heap of aging, illness, and death. If these palace maidens knew they were being revulsion and fear of even themselves, how could they feel desire for another's aging, ill, or dead body? For those who care only about happiness, forget the horror of death, and become mired in the pleasures of the five desires, how are they any different from ignorant beasts? So the Buddhist revolutionary for the 21st century thus starts from here, shifting the emphasis not just onto the self, but onto others, to realize yes, perfection happens the moment when you realize the both importance at the same time. And so therefore we say that inspired him to go on to what we call renunciation. And skipping through the story where he went through 6 years of this asceticism, standing on only one foot for days and nights, or eating only 1 grain of wheat or sesame, starving himself to the extent that the front of his stomach touched the back of his spine, he found no enlightenment. Okay? Until the moment when that shepherdess brought him that bowl back to 是人 where he sat beneath the tree and was being offered that milk. And why we are saying this on this point, okay, about the idea of the middle path, I think it's once again to really instate our connection with the real world. Okay, by saying that, okay, that realization of the need for the middle path presented in the following way, where it says, right now, I assume that hurting my body is good, while granting it pleasure is bad. It has become a habit. In my pursuit of enlightenment, I have become attached to fasting and ascetic practices. How am I any different from the ascetic Brahma and his companions? So to say that, I think we're being presented with the need to rethink how we live, especially in the path of right action and right livelihood in the Noble Eightfold Path. Right? The third of the four noble truths tells us that yes, we travel a path that leads us to the end of suffering. Okay? But that path, when it includes right action and right livelihood, are we doing what is right and appropriate for us to help us achieve that goal? Is there the need to go to the extremes of life in order for us to free ourselves from the cycle of life and death? And in this biography, we kind of see a different perspective. We're being reminded now that, sure, as a Buddhist, you should by all means pursue an economic life. Why? Because after all, you have to live. So this becomes the first shift from the usual claim that, yes, gold is poison. Your wife is your enemy from your past. She has come to torture you. Okay? Your children have come to collect debts from you. That's why you have to be so kind to them. Okay? And the 21st Buddhist Saigai, we now realize, yes, in realizing that connection, okay, why don't we turn around and say, yes, when we make good use of money, right, it becomes the driving force to us, changing the world, making the world a better place. Right? Or when we learn, okay, now that there's the fact that you're already married, okay? You don't get divorced just because you come across as part in the sutra where Buddha says your couple is your enemy, so you get divorced. It's about coming face to face with reality. And so therefore, in that biography, you find in one way or the other ways for you to really maintain what we call a happy or holistic married life. We can see this in how Prince Siddhartha deals with Yashoda. Okay, remember when people say, oh, you Buddhists are so responsible, look at your founder. He abandoned his wife, left behind his son just to seek his own liberation. Okay? Reading this biography will do some justification to Siddhartha's choice and to see how he actually came with a good outcome. But nevertheless, once again, remember, to how to perfect our lives as a human being is also how we live in harmony with others. Okay, so no more foes, no more debtors. There are your companions, there are your bodhisattvas. Okay, fourth part. Upon entering Nirvana, okay, first message to tell us that Buddha was still a human being was the fact that, yes, he died. When I first started to learn to read Buddhist literature, okay, some of my teachers told me that, no, you don't say Buddha died, you say Buddha entered Nirvana. So in a way, he never died. So the way that we were brought up with, whenever we came across literature that says Buddha died, people kind of went, oh, it's not right. But that's as sure as a fact as it can ever be. So in the book, upon the moment of death, we can also see how this human being dealt with life. So before he died, okay, having eaten the poisonous mushroom, okay, once again breaking the mystery that yes, as a Buddha you never get sick. Unfortunately, he did. Okay? And his disciples were sad. Okay? But this was his final message in teaching the disciples how to deal with death. So this is where it says, my disciples, do not feel sorrow. Even if I were to preserve this physical body and live together with you for millions of years, the way would come when we would part. Where there is union, there is separation. This is an immutable truth. This world now knows the teachings on the Four Noble Truths and the 12 links of dependent origination. All of you understand the principles of benefiting oneself and others. the Dharma is now complete. So he's saying, yes, I have fulfilled my life in this world as a human being. I have sent forth my message. And so those beings who were ready to cross over have already done so. And for those who are not yet ready, I have planted the causes and conditions for their liberation in the future. There's no need for this body to go any further. Continue to practice in accordance with my teachings, for that is where my Dhamma body resides. Then the Buddha peacefully entered final nirvana. Do you notice anything supernatural or mystical in this process? A regular man delivering his final message because this is it, goodbye. And so having said that, okay, the author adds a little bit more in, yes, as human beings we need to learn how to deal with death before and after it. And so there is a moment where his disciple asked him, how does one prepare a funeral for a wheel-turning monarch? 转轮圣王. This is the Buddha's answer. First, bathe the body in fragrant water, then wrap it in fresh, clean cotton. Afterwards, wrap it in 500 layers of felt before placing the body in a golden casket. Pour sesame oil into this casket and then place the golden casket into an iron case. Surround the coffin with sandalwood and incense and fresh flowers. A funeral practice that is still being done in India for a couple of reasons. In the hot climate, when the body rots, it smells. Not to cause aversion to corpse. These are some of the instructions that the Buddha has left behind to Indians who still do it today. That was pretty much all he said. And he even said, a Buddha may use the flames of samadhi to conduct his own cremation. Something a little bit beyond the ordinary. What he was saying that is, you should correct any relics that remain after cremation and construct a stupa to house them at the middle of intersections of roads, so that passerbys will be reminded of the Buddha and arouse faith. That instruction is something which you can see, okay? The fact that it's not your body that lives, but rather your spirit or your philosophy that continues to live on. Okay? So that is something which you can see in Christians and Catholics when they come to build churches in the East. Yes. Long before we start to see Buddhist temples in cities, we are already seeing churches at crossroads. We are already seeing missionaries who are learning to speak our language and to approach us, all to spread the truth. But be reminded again, yes, only the part about the fire of samadhi, but the rest of the Buddha's final messages were pretty much lifelike. Okay. But on the other hand, okay, just to do a bit of comparison in 是人 Liu, upon the moment where the Buddha died, after they had placed him in the golden casket, this is the part where celestial beings and deities descended from the sky and started to cry. So you can see at the bottom of the picture, this part in Chinese is called Jing Gang Ai Lian. Okay, the Vajra protectors break into tears. Okay. Not mentioned in the biography. And second, okay, knowing that Queen Maya, who died after giving birth to Prince Siddhartha, lived in Triascrimsha heaven. 刀立天. Okay. So in that heaven, in 世人 Liu, there's a part where the queen already dreamt of the Buddha's death. Okay. Not mentioned in the biography I wanted to present today. And the part where even Queen Maya descended from heaven to sprinkle flour over the Buddha's body, not mentioned, but being kept in 世人 Liu. And so, knowing that his mother came, the Buddha rose from the coffin. Okay, maybe a picture of one of the most famous American drama series nowadays, Walking Dead. Someone arises from the dead to come and get you, but of course not. Okay, once again, rising from the coffin, not mentioned in the biography. And this is a part when they carried his coffin so it could be cremated. The coffin refused to move because of Buddha's power of samadhi, 定力, not mentioned in the biography. And so after trying, no one could move the coffin, and eventually when time came, the coffin started to fly by itself towards location of cremation, not mentioned in the biography. And then finally, this is the part where Mahakasyapa, who was teaching in a very faraway land, finally got the message of the passing away of the Buddha, rushed back just moments before his body was being cremated. This too was mentioned in the biography where it says Mahakasyapa broke down into tears because he had no chance to hear the final words of his teacher. So out of compassion, suddenly the Buddha stuck out his feet from the coffin to show that, yes, Mahakasyapa, I know you're here. But I think mentioned in the biography by Venerable Master is really to show that, yes, the Buddha could feel the sadness of his disciple. Right? So that sign of showing his feet reminded him, yes, I know where you are, follow my path. Okay, so this was actually included in the biography. And the part where they tried to light up the coffin but couldn't. Remember the Buddha says, a Buddha may use the fire of his samadhi to cremate himself. Okay? Similar point, they tried, but the coffin wouldn't catch on fire until the moment it catches on the fire of the Buddha's samadhi himself. So in this part, when he says that, okay, I believe the author is trying to present the point, yes, remember what remains behind. That is being said as beyond the natural part of an ordinary human being is the eternity of his teaching and wisdom. And so finally, after the Buddha was cremated, the 8 heavenly kings, including Ashoka, came and divided up the Buddha's relics into 8 portions, and each brought them back to his country and enshrined them. Little connection, but suddenly in the book it was actually kings from 8 different countries. And once again, trying to emphasize the eternity of this person of wisdom. And so therefore we will see, yes, in the several stages, the Buddha still told us that human beings do go through old age, sickness, and death. Okay, but eventually that is not our life, that lives and dies. Our true life is presented in the form of what we call Dharma. And so being a human, now the second part is how he became more extraordinary. Okay? When a human being is extraordinary, nothing more than a human being, he becomes extraordinary. So on this second part, I would like to present the several occasions in how he started to transcend the status of being merely a human, but one who was able to deal with the sufferings of life. The most famous being the part where he decides to leave his family. Right? It's hard. Right? And this is a chance for us to really do Siddhartha justification. Okay? Why did the prince make such a decision? Was he just a selfish man who would abandon his old father, his wife, and his newborn son? Let's begin by the part where he decides that, yes, I'm going to take the great going forward. Okay? So as a dutiful son, he still approached his father and said, look, father, this is my decision. He didn't just pop out and say, okay, bye, I'm going. He engaged in a conversation. Okay? But this is a conversation we've hardly come across. So it's a chance to see what the father and son said to each other. Was it emotional? Was it rational? Or was it anything but selfish? And so having heard his son's decision, this is King Suddhodana's reaction. Siddhartha, stop. You cannot think this way. You're still young. The world is not as bad as you think, and life is not as painful as you have imagined. If you leave to pursue spiritual practice, you will not find what you're looking for. And he continues, many look for liberation and live in quiet forest, but their hearts do not find true peace. Siddhartha, if you wish to seek the path, wait until you're as old as me. Otherwise, you will find it difficult to accomplish your aim. You may even come to regret it. The first 2 two attempts of the Father. First of all, you will not find happiness outside the world. Okay? I think speaking through King Suddhodana, this is also what Venerable Master wants to say. Find enlightenment by being a part of the world. And second attempt, wait till you get old to become a monastic. Okay? We all hear that. Okay? That's why when I was young, I grew up believing that this Buddhism was a religion for elderlies. Only grandmas and grandpas showed up in the temple to pray. Okay? Young people are still out there playing. But suddenly, if you come across Guang, it could be as big as a shocker you can ever come across. Okay? Young monastics finding aspirations. Okay? But I think through that inspiration, it presents a very common perspective of families when they come across family members who want to become renounced. Okay? Trying to put forth, okay, this is how I see it. If you don't follow my instruction, you're going to suffer. Okay? Now, if you were the son, right, would you be emotional or would you be stubborn? Let's look at how Venerable Master presents a rational perspective in the son. Being dutiful is not just saying, okay, I'm just telling you, but you don't have to convince me. But in return, he convinces his father by saying the following. If you're able to grant me 4 requests, then I can reconsider my wish to renounce. First, put an end to old age. Second, remove the pain of illness. Third, destroy the fear of death. And fourth, let all things neither increase or decrease. Sounds pretty fair, right? I will listen to you if you can help me resolve these problems. That was his rational response. But secondly, this is what he actually really wants to say. I am trapped in a burning house, and I must flee to safety. Meetings lead to separation. What comes together must fall apart. These are simple truths. No matter our place in the world, if we live well, we must die. If we do not live well, we must also die. Death is inevitable, so why not seek liberation while we are alive? So 2 questions being answered with these 2 responses. First of all, to present a very dear issue that needs to be resolved. Dad, if you can resolve it, I'll stay. Okay? But if you can't, okay, listen further. Okay? Don't ask me to wait till I'm old. This is something which I need to do now, in the here and now, living in reality. So this is how Venerable Master presents the prince's response. And so, having said that, of course, the conversation was rather unsuccessful. They failed to convince each other. Okay, so we hear that, yes, the king then locked his son up, okay, as his final attempt to stop him from leaving. So this is what happened. In their elaborate outfits, they tried with all their heart, playing beautiful music even in the dark of night. The beautiful mesmeric tunes had no effect on the prince. So this is where the father tries to distract his son from the great going forth by giving him more beautiful women. Okay? If you don't see life as beautiful, I'll give you more beautiful parts of life. So this had no effect on the prince, for his heart was far, far away, empty of any desire. One night, after an exhausting day of performing, the girls went to their beds. Their makeup became smudged and uneven. Their postures askew and unseemly. Some slept with their faces towards the sky. Others curled into balls before closing their eyes. Their musical instruments lay silent by their sides. Their ornaments hung down like chains. Their clothing twisted around them like ropes, looking like punished prisoners as they hung to their roots. Some lay against the walls as if pinned there by arrows. Some lay prostrate on tables as if they had been hanged. Some drooled, some snored. Some slept with eyes closed and mouth agape, and some would grind their teeth. Okay, so now imagine the most beautiful women doing all of these. Okay? Would they be enough to convince you from going out from the great going forth? So presenting a very vivid picture also kind of shows us an answer in, yes, when monastics come across the temptations of lust, they realize they're nothing but rotten sacks that will eventually fade. they will not provide the ultimate joy. And so that was also kind of a way for us to see, okay, it really clung onto beauty. Okay, that story of happily ever after doesn't live. Okay, when Snow White finally awakens from that kiss by the prince, the next morning when the prince snores, drools, picks his feet and throws his socks all over the ground. Okay, can you still picture that happily ever after by finding the most handsome, the most powerful man in the world? So I found this part quite interesting in how Venerable Master also presents his answer when people say, oh look, has any young woman ever come after you? There are actually stories about when men, some elderly said to Venerable Master, look, stop being a Buddhist monk. Just come be my son-in-law. I'll give you all the money, you can have everything. But Master probably said, read this is my view. Okay. And so, let's go back to that night, okay, to the great going forth. So, to the perspective of Siddhartha. When Siddhartha heard the music stop, he rose from his bed. Outside the window, the moon shone like a disc of bright silver. The prince could not return to sleep. As he dressed, he peered over at slumbering Yashodhara. Holding young Rahula in her embrace, without disturbing them, he left his bedchamber. One final look, he leaves. As he passed through the other rooms, the prince was shocked. These maidens, once alluring and seductive, now transformed into such ghastly forms. Siddhartha looked upon them for a short moment in silence, utterly speechless. He thought, all things are illusory. I cannot hesitate a moment longer. I must leave here and seek liberation. Okay, so the little incident in how he breaks free from that palace life. And then, after he left, his father sent forth 5 of his ministers in their effort, the most eloquent, the most wise, to try to convince the prince. And the conversation is also quite interesting. I think this is also a pretty good debate between where those who believe that, yes, monastic life or renunciation is important. And so this is the part where the ministers catch up with the prince and say, yes, even if you sever your ties of affection and seclude yourself in forest, it is difficult to imagine that you feel nothing for your grieving father. Once again, playing the old father card, the old grieving father card, family bond. But it's as real as it gets. All of us are bonded to that. Honoring one's parents is also a part of practice. You say that your aim is to save the entire world, to liberate all people. But right now, I suffer. Why do you not save your father? Your decision to become a renunciant has caused a great flood of sorrow to come crashing into my heart, shattering it, such that it cannot be repaired. And to read that, Venerable Master Hsing Yun's father left him while he was very young. According to him, his only image of his father was a very tall man who put on a hat, picked up a suitcase and left the house and never came back. He cannot even remember what his father looks like. But at the same time, he is perfectly aware of the moments when family are torn apart, for whatever reasons. This is probably what has enabled him to present such a vivid feeling of the father who has lost his son, well, symbolically. And so the minister tries to push the argument further by saying, how can you claim to be compassionate if you refuse and abandon your father and mother? How can you say you wish to liberate all sentient beings and shelter them in that compassionate heart of yours? True path does not have to be sought in the deep forest of the mountains. It is not difficult to find a place of peace in the city or the palace. The true path may be found wherever you are. Only when one's heart flees from nothing and fears nothing can one truly become one who seeks the path. Okay, now closing the irony. Okay, yes, we are faced with that family bond which none of us can ever give up. So the pursuit of spirituality must not be done without attention to this. And secondly, once again, speaking through the voice of the minister, the author's thoughts in telling you, yes, true peace is found in the here and now, in your heart. We can see two sides of the coin where Venerable Master speaks through the voices of Siddhartha's story while presenting to you other options of how we as Buddhists in the 21st century can actually pursue that path. Okay, again and again, concern for human beings and the fact that yes, everything is done in the here and now. And now, having said all of this, now I put you in the position of Siddhartha. How would you be able to retort? How would you be able to walk away from the conversation, not making the minister feel that, yes, I am a selfish and a cold-hearted son? So ladies and gentlemen, when the truth is beyond all sentiments and bonds, the truth becomes much more transcending. This is the moment when human beings become extraordinary. This is his answer. Wise ministers, would you hungrily eat vomit that you have just thrown up? That is the choice you have given me. Okay, bringing this dilemma onto a broader scope. It's not just about family anymore, it's about the greater good. I have finally managed to escape a burning building, and now you tell me to run back inside. Am I supposed to foolishly obey? When I saw the sorrows of birth, old age, illness, and death, I cast aside the palace and the 5 desires in disgust. If I return and go back to the palace of delusion, how is it different from running back into a burning building? Now bringing the dilemma onto a higher scope, to cut the story short, Siddhartha ends up convincing the ministers, so these 5 ministers never returned to the palace, instead decided to follow him, and became the first 5 bhikkhus. Helping them to realize, yes, sometimes bringing us onto a higher level, we realize, yes, there are greater issues at hand. And in the end, being able to solve that greater issue, the smaller ones are solved together as well. Okay, so therefore, he remains a renunciant. We have a few more minutes left. This is probably the best part, okay, where he deals with Yashodhara. So we have been hearing people say that, okay, Prince Siddhartha, irresponsible, selfish husband. Okay? How can you not feel for your wife? And then this author who has never become married, okay, presents emotions of his wife on all levels. Okay, it's quite interesting to see. And so, okay, this is a part about Suddhodana. Okay? Let's see how they met, how they got married, and how she feels after her husband has left her. This is the first part when Suddhodana fails to convince the prince from becoming married. So seeing his beloved son lapse into wordless silence and deep contemplation, King Suddhodana became extremely distressed. So when the prince was 17, Suddhodana arranged for his son to marry the beautiful Yashodhara and take her as his wife. He thought that perhaps by having a beautiful wife by his side, the prince would become happy and less sullen. Loving father, great effort, fantastic job. Prince Yashodhara, the eldest daughter of King Suprabuddha of the city of Devadaha, had a gentle and refined bearing. She was like the first flower of spring, and was beautiful as a heavenly maiden that had descended to the human world. Okay, try to imagine how beautiful Yashodhara is. How can you resist the most beautiful woman in the world? King Suddhodana hoped that with beautiful women, pure wine and fine music, he could lift the prince's spirits. But even though Siddhartha found it difficult to resist these desires, he believed that this type of happiness would not lead to pure and lasting fulfillments in life. Though at times the prince would smile, deep within his heart, feelings of hollowness and loneliness swelled up. He did not completely push the 5 desires away as a prince, but that sadness, that emptiness is always in his heart. And so after King Suddhodana locks Siddhartha up to prevent him from renouncing palace life, this is what happened. Okay? This was despite having a beautiful wife. The prince locked himself in a quiet room, rarely seeing even Yashodhara and Rahula. Having just given birth to their first son, Yashodhara's time and attention was focused on their child. she doted on little Rahula, presuming that her husband, Siddhartha, was preoccupied with matters of the kingdom, too busy to spend time with her. First sign of a broken marriage. First effort in doing Siddhartha justification was the fact that, sure, we say that Siddhartha was selfish, but by this part, was probably the moment where perhaps Yashodhara failed to notice her husband's sorrow. She's saying, oh, I love you, you're so beautiful, you're so wonderful. You're probably too busy to respond to me. Okay? So that failure from the wife's end to pay attention to her husband's emotion partly contributed to the separation. That's what this part wants to say. So all along, when Yashodhara felt that her marriage was doing well, this was Siddhartha's thought. Terrifying is the suffering of birth, old age, illness, and death. To resolve this unending menace, I have no choice but to abandon love and affection. That's what he thought. Therefore, after Siddhartha leaves and convinces the flight ministers to follow him, this is Yashodhara's first reaction. Anger. So having realized that Chandaka, Chedi, was the one who helped the prince leave the palace, her first anger was taken out on this man. Chanda, you have robbed me of all my joy. You are a wretched, terrible person. You have abandoned him somewhere and returned alone, totally blaming this on Chandaka. You snatched away the kingdom's joy. Now this place is filled with sadness and suffering. To her, the loss of her husband is not only devastating on her, but on the entire kingdom. And in this case, it's all Chandaka's fault, in the mind of Yashodhara. Unless you return my husband to me, I can no longer live here. Take responsibility. Do you hear the sobbing that fills the palace? You have abandoned the prince. How can you be so cruel? Not realizing where the responsibility falls, Yashodhara went on to blame Kantaka, the horse. Okay, so after screaming at Chandaka, she starts to scream at the white horse. Good thing probably the horse didn't understand human language. Okay? But I think in this process, why the author added this part really is to sort of go through Yashodhara's emotions, okay? Which is actually important because when you experience some kind of sorrow or a crisis in life, it's actually normal to go through all of this. He didn't just say, okay, Yashodhara was sad, waited, and then was happy to see Prince again. Okay? She, as a human being, felt all of this. Now, the second reaction. After being angry, she became resentful. My husband is an unfeeling, uncaring man. Though he appears kind and dignified, his heart is harder than metal, colder than ice. He does not care for his son's infancy, nor does he understand the love I feel for him. His heart must be made of wood or stone. Okay, so after the anger, after blaming Chandaka and the horse, she starts to blame her husband. You were so uncaring. But remember in the first part, maybe she was uncaring too. Okay? You were so uncaring and you have no responsibility on your son. But it's so true. Most of us would take this to be the attitude of someone who renounces household life. Make it worse, one who has married. Okay? So, second level, and it only goes deeper and deeper. Please bear with me, let's see how it turns out. It's a happily ever after ending. After resentment, it becomes doubt. Okay? After the anger, after blaming her husband, she now has doubts in herself. Okay? If my husband desired this, I would have accompanied him. Why has he abandoned me and gone off on his own? According to the ancient Vedas, all Brahmanical rituals require the husband and wife to perform them together, so that the same causes are planted for both. To her, she still believes that husband and wife must do the same thing. Okay? That way, both may gain rebirth in heaven and partake in the joy there alongside one another. That's the way she was brought up. But my husband was unwilling to bring me with him. Why is this? You're seeing something good. I'm happy to come with you. Why did you not bring me along? Okay? The doubt goes on. Maybe he feels that I'm too jealous, or wants another who is less envious. Maybe he feels that I'm too coarse and ugly, and wishes to find another more beautiful woman to accompany him. Okay? Still revolving around the wife himself. Where is the problem coming from? Okay, now, it's time to think that maybe I'm too ugly for my husband. Totally not getting the story. And next level, helplessness. Okay? Not being able to find an answer. At this point, she says to herself, by losing my husband, I have lost all happiness. In search of truth, he has abandoned me. Who can I rely on now? How will I live in this lonely, painful existence? So going from level to level, it's quite interesting to see how a monastic who renounced at age 12 could really feel the emotion of a woman who loses her husband on all levels. But he's also doing justice to both. Okay? Yashodhara had to suffer because of the emotions that she had as a wife. And so finally, after Buddha attained enlightenment, she hears that the Buddha is coming back to Kapilavastu. Okay? So she starts to fantasize about the reunion. Is he going to get down to his knees, break into tears and say, oh, I'm so sorry? Is he going to tell me that I still love you? And so after the different doubts, anger, resentment, okay, and helplessness, now it goes into fantasy. Yashodhara also thought that upon his return, the Buddha should come to see her first to assuage some of her pain from being left alone for more than a decade. Still caught up in thinking, okay, you abandoned me, so you should come and make me feel better. Okay? But when the Buddha arrived at the palace, it was as if he had forgotten she existed. Sad story. As the princess retired to the inner palace, her emotion overwhelmed her. At times, she became furious. At other times, she felt pride at the coming reunion. She fantasized that when the prince finally did see her again, he would certainly utter sweet words to her. Beautiful fantasy. But when she thought more, she realized that this would be impossible. The prince was now a fully enlightened Buddha and was tasked with loving all living beings. How could he still love her as an individual? She decided that she would be content with observing him from a distance. Inside the palace, Yashodhara fidgeted endlessly. Finally, she leaned against a pillar and began to sob. It must be hard to go through fantasy after fantasy and into certain levels of realization that it's not going to happen because he's now a Buddha. The Buddha was expressing his gratitude to his adopted mother, Mahaprajapati, for raising him, and not to degree his half-brother, Nanda, when Rahula and Yashodhara, walking hand in hand, entered the room. Moment of truth. Drowning. When he saw Yashodhara, the Buddha's dignified eyes were filled with empathy, sympathy, and compassion. The emotional and beautiful Yashodhara was filled with love, hatred, and uncountable other feelings, all churning in her heart. At that moment, Yashodhara raised her head to look upon the Buddha. The Buddha remained silent and unmoving. She began to feel as if a great weight has been lifted from her shoulders, finally bringing her peace. Even so, she continued to tightly grasp Rahula's hand and tremble. When the Buddha finally spoke to her, Yashodhara felt it would be more proper to kneel. Can you sense the transition of the relationship here? Okay. She started to feel that presence of the Buddha. Okay. In feeling the presence of that great compassion, these doubts and emotions start to lift from her. She starts to finally feel her husband's true feelings, who was now a Buddha. The Buddha spoke slowly to the kneeling figure of Yashodhara, saying, I have burdened you. I regret having wronged you, but I am now responsible for all beings. Be happy for me, for I have fulfilled my vow. Yes, he apologized, but with a response for a greater good. After speaking to Yashodhara, the Buddha looked upon Rahula and spoke to him with kindness. You have grown so tall. For a father who had not seen his son for years, this is the only thing he says to him. But showing so much care and concern in a father, no more words needed to be spoken. quite well laid out. Once again, doing justification to let the readers know, no, he wasn't irresponsible, he wasn't uncaring. He knew the pain he had to go through. And this was the moment he comes back to answer to her used-to-be wife and son. The Buddha seemed both stoic and tender. All who heard were moved by his words and demeanor. Such is the reunion, not just dramatic, but ever so powerful in a very peaceful way. And so they join. Eventually the story has it that Yashoda joined the monastic Sangha as well, realizing, yes, this is eventually the trip I had to follow. But something bothered the Buddha still. It wasn't really a perfect outcome for the two of them, not for the husband and wife, okay, until this part. Not long after Yashodhara joined Mahaprajapati and became a bhikkhuni as well, after Yashodhara ordained, the Buddha was not as displeased as he was. It is as if he set down a heavy burden he was carrying in his heart. The Buddha was not a person without affection. He knew affection all too well. And so to lay out the story this way between a husband and his wife, how they reconciled their relationships in an ending that leads all of them to the greater good, the great path. This is the story that we can read about Sakyamuni Buddha. This is probably something we can think of when we are being placed with the challenge. Yes, Siddhartha was selfish. And so this is probably one of my favorite parts in the biography, to see, yes, he was a human being all too well. He knew all the affections. He knew the emotions. He just never allowed these emotions to get in the way of that great path. And so in the biography, we see a lot of the stories where he also deals with kings, with untouchables, with people of all walks, and even with heavenly beings. Again and again, speaking the Dharma he had come to realize, or as a human being who learned the new way to show his love. And so for this reason, that is why I'm presenting the biography of Sakyamuni Buddha, to show a small part as a beginning for us to get a glimpse into the life of an extraordinary human being who eventually found the greatest path of all. And so may this also be a path for us to follow. There are lots of other stories. Again, I'm not trying to ask you to buy the book, but if you ever get your hands on a copy, I would encourage you to, yes, come face to face with this human being and seeing how he deals with reality. And in the end of the book, this is probably the final message that we need to find out. First of all, if you actually finish reading the book, ask yourself, who is the Buddha? Is it Siddhartha? Is it Sakyamuni Buddha? So who? Obviously, we want to know that the answer is, it's us, right? Following a similar path, experiencing the pain, the suffering, the joy, and the wisdom. Perhaps one day we'll realize that we too can be that Buddha. And second, how do we awaken the Buddha within? First of all, accept the fact that we are human beings, but hold hopes that we too can one day perfect this character and reach that ultimate goal. And thirdly, who do we rely on to find Buddha? Again, on our own life experiences, which is subsumed in the interconnectedness with all other human beings in this world. So in the process of caring for others, thinking for others, we learn to think for ourselves and to care for ourselves. Okay. Final messages of the Buddha once again, all compounded things decay. Work out your own salvation with diligence. And remember, reading the life of this extraordinary human being, that's what we need to always bear in mind. Rely on ourselves, rely on the Dharma, and rely on others. And so that's it for my presentation of the biography. And may we meet again in the future when we are able to come across more stories, and hopefully in the future we will have more chances to discuss with one another. And I hope that this finger that points to the path can be a useful one to all of you. So once again, thank you very much for spending this evening. I'm very honored and grateful for that you're willing to be here and to spend time with me. And I would like to say thank you, and may Buddha bless you for this wonderful night of Dharma gathering.
Thank you, Venerable Professor Miao Guang, for sharing your wisdom with us tonight. We have now come to our Q&A session. If you have any questions, please raise your hand and we will get to you shortly.
As we know, this book is written by Master Hsing Yun, and in this book he insisted that Sakyamuni Buddha is a human being, and just like you said, he is born on earth, get enlightenment on earth, even entered nirvana on earth. So from this point of view, I would like to ask you is that what kind of the character of Mr. Hsing Yun. I think this is the most important if we are concerned. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your question. To see the kind of character of the author through his writing. And first of all, we will probably see that he is a very caring human being. Okay? Everything he has done, when we ask, how do you manage to do such a good job? For example, how do you manage to lead a Buddhist community with 1,200 people who are willing to follow you without pay and to work 24 hours? Ask them, right? And how do you manage to build the Buddha Memorial Center in such a short time, but that makes people of all walks of age so satisfying? Every time that question is being pressed onto him, his only answer would be, that is because I always think from the perspective of human beings. He never forgets that as a human being, we first need to satisfy your needs. And only bodhisattvas will be willing to do that. And so to me, for a master whom I've been following almost side by side for the past 15 years, I would say he's very caring, very humorous. Okay, on 2 occasions. When I first started to follow him, there was a time when he was having a meeting, right? But having his long-term leg problems. Once he came so close to having to have his legs amputated, but he did not. He actually has to constantly walk around with the pain in his legs. So time by time, his medical attendant will ask him to put his leg up on a stool, right, to ease the pain. And so that was the day when that moment of therapy came to an end. So we assisted him to put his leg down, and I wanted him to help him to put his shoes back on. He was sitting behind a table. So I got on my knees, get down on my knees, and to put my head underneath the table to help him to put the shoes back on. As I did that, I felt his hand above my head. He was sitting there, but he did that for me. Right? Why? Because he did not want me to bump my head onto the table when I was helping him to put the shoes on. It comes from a very caring master and a man who knew that, yes, every moment I'm also looking out for you. And to say that he was very humorous was that he always knew how to make you feel comfortable. So, for example, there was a year when I was at Nantian Temple. It was a huge opening. So all the monastics have been very busy working from night till dawn. But unfortunately, when it comes to a day when we have to shave our head, regulations at Guang has it that we can only shave it after we go to bed and before we have breakfast. And so that day when the ceremony was about to begin, this disciple only had 10 minutes to shave her head. Okay. Try shaving when you have like 10 seconds. This is for the gentleman. Scratches all over your skin. Right? So when the prayer ceremony began with this monastic who came out from that 10-minute moment of sharing, we turned around, really shocked to see all these scars on her head from the blade. And so Venerable Master turned around and goes, "Oh, my head is bleeding." And so he didn't really say anything else. But to us, we can feel that yes, every moment, when we devote ourselves to the services of the temple, he too has been watching over us. And so I would say that characteristic links very well back to the biography. So that he was able to observe us so closely, so that he was able to present these emotions of a wife, of a son, of a father, and even of a minister in such great and vivid detail. And so this is the type of man, of human being that Venerable Master Hsing Yun can be. So thank you very much for the question. I hope this answers the question.
Thank you very much. Is there any more questions?
Master Guang, I would like to know if you know that the Venerable Master, when writing this book, did he base on many historical literary sources? Because I read the Chinese version, when I read each sentence as spoken by the Buddha, as if spoken by the Buddha Sakyamuni himself, then I have the feeling that as if the book is the Buddha is here. So how can the Venerable Master did that? Purely from his own thinking and knowledge, or and also based on many other historical literary sources? I would like to know the answer.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to know if you as the student following him many years, do you know any of this aspect?
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. That is actually the question we asked him as well. Yes, Venerable Master grew up uneducated. His parents never sent him to school. And after he became renounced, his master did not send him to school either. So he was not educated, except for the moments when he was being taught in the Buddhist college. And so he used his opportunities to put his hands on any books that he would come across. He pretty much learned by reading. There was a period in his life at the Buddhist college in Shan where he opted to serve as a librarian. He said the best part about being a librarian is that you can officially and openly sit down to read when everyone else is working and serving the monastery. So I feel that the hunger for books and reading, starting at a young age, is probably something which contributed to his imagination. And also something that allowed him to come across the corpus of Buddhist texts. So yes, first answer, he did make reference to the Buddhist sutras that mention stories about Sakyamuni Buddha. And secondly, he wrote this book at the age of 26, when he first arrived in Taiwan, staying in Yilan, a very small rundown temple, where the only light bulb, the electricity light bulb that appeared was from the shrine. And so, living in a small room that he called his bedroom next to the shrine, every night he would draw this light bulb next door, let it hang off the side of the door because the cord was too short. So, off the dim light, he would start to imagine and to write different stages of the Buddha's life. He first started writing this as a column for one of the Buddhist magazines. And so he said, when he sat there, yes, he himself put himself in the position of the Buddha. He said, okay, if I were the Buddha who went through this, what would have happened? Okay. So therefore, at a lot of stages, he said he came so close to crying in feeling the Buddha's compassion. When the Buddha personally threaded a needle for his blind pupil, when the Buddha waited up all night for the disciple of his disciple who came from a faraway country, and to spare half of his room so that this young disciple could have a place to sleep on in the middle of the night. So all of this will be, yes, partly from imagination, but secondly, I feel that it is the devotion of Venerable Master to the Buddha. Having never met him, but it's like, okay, what is my father like, although I have never seen him? Right? What is my mother like, even though she has left me while I was young? I think all this yearning from having lost his father at a young age, and all this devotion and this inspiration and admiration in the Buddha probably contributed to this imaginative retelling of what we call a novel. It may not be totally like a historical biography, but I feel that it's the retelling as a novel adds so much more into the emotions of the stories which you have just read. And a simple line, "You have grown so tall." Probably Sakyamuni Buddha never said that to Rahula. Okay? But that was from the master's perspective in thinking, yes, I have not met my son for years. Okay? What can I say in 1 second to show him that, yes, I have always cared about him? And even in the end, help him become renounced and became one of his enlightened disciples. And so while this all comes from the bottom of the heart, to feel for other fellow human beings. So Shantideva once said, yes, if your happiness is not there, then I have no happiness. That too should be displayed in all bodhisattvas and potential bodhisattvas like you here. Thank you very much.
Professor Venerable and all very honorable guests here. Well, I was thinking that I have read from some sources that the Venerable Master Hsing Yun has at one time got hold of a suitcase of novels from Western literature. And he had been reading all of this stuff.
Yes.
And probably because of that, he was able to write his books from this manner, being influenced by humanity that he read in the Western literature. So probably when he was writing this book, he was also influenced, and so he was writing it as a novel from the Western point of view, as it were literature. So that was the reason why he was able to bring it to life. Would it be possible for this influence as well?
Okay. Thank you very much. That's quite interesting. But I think that too has been discussed by Venerable Master. When he was young, he read about Schweitzer's story. He read about Western figures. Right? He pretty much put his eyes on anything he could get his hands on. And so that was a moment when his knowledge started to expand. But I feel that another important stage was when in his teens, when he first arrived at Shan Monastery. The teachings were so strict that his teachers prohibited him from looking at anything or speaking. Right? In his biography, it says that if you looked around, right, his teachers were slapping him on the face and said, what are you looking at? What is it that seems that belongs to you? Or when he says something, right, and he will once again get a slap in the face and said, this is no place for you to talk. And that kind of angered him, or actually stimulated his desire to say, yes, if you don't want me to talk, if you don't want me to look, I stop looking and I stop talking. Okay? But remember the moment when you start to try to output something, the input becomes much more sensitive and stronger. If you're prevented from speaking, your hearing becomes sharper. If you stop speaking, your eyes start to observe better. So I would say, added to his extensive reading, I think those periods of not speaking and not looking gave him a chance to reflect from within, for him to reconnect with the world that is within him. So adding this too, I think another key point is that he has learned to write as if he was talking. He learned from Dr. Shan, who once said that 写文章就像说话一样. You should write in the manner as you speak. Right? In other words, you paint your ideas through your words that people can see. This is my recent encounter with Venerable Master. Okay, I said to him, look, how do you present your language in such easy to understand way? He goes, because I want people to see my words and see my thoughts. Okay, so he used a poem as an example. He says, when you're actually explaining something, okay, you have to make sure that the listener and your audience can see it in their brain as well. So for example, for that poem, 枫桥夜泊,月落乌啼霜满天. So he says that upon the moment the moon falls behind the trees, okay, the darkness causes the crows to cry into a very cloudy and misty sky. You see that now? 月落乌啼霜满天,江枫渔火对愁眠. So upon that moment when the moon falls, as the day comes to an end, right, across the river from the crying crows, you see the fishermen villages, right, with very dimly lit lights that cause a sense of sorrow in that closing moment of the day, depicted in dimming light. Okay. And 姑苏城外寒山寺, right? And so what happens along this river? Okay. 夜半钟声到客船. So on both sides you see the crying crows and that sad, melancholic feeling of the closing end of the fisher village. At the same time, what happens is a boat that travels towards Hanshan Si, from outside of the city. Right? For what? Drawing close. 夜半钟声到客船. So as the boat sails towards Hanshan Si, right? What greets the boat becomes the bell toll that comes from afar, from a temple that even the boat is not able to see yet. So two opposites. I found that quite interesting because I grew up in Australia. Okay? To ask me to recite a poem is like twisting my arms and twisting my ears. There's no way. Okay? But after his explanation, there's no way that I will forget this poem anymore, because he has painted a picture in my mind with his words. Okay? That easy. Okay? So you don't over-deliberate your expressions. You simply express what you think. And therefore, this is the kind of biography we see in front of you, full of human sentiments, full of drama, but full of facts and wisdom. It's actually quite inspiring to see him explain all of this, in person. So I feel very blessed, but at the same time, he has brought my understanding of classical Chinese onto a whole new level. So for that, I'm actually quite grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and because we're running out of time, so next, as a token of appreciation, I would like to call upon Professor Chen Jianhuang to present a souvenir to the guest speaker. So Professor Chen and Venerable Professor Miao. To an end. Thank you for coming tonight, and we hope you have enjoyed this evening. There will be more seminars organized by the Center for the Study of Humanistic Buddhism, and we would like to invite all of you to join us again soon in the International Conference on Development of Humanistic Buddhism in East Asia and Southeast Asia on November 14th and 15th. Thank you and good night.